when a teacher desires to communicate a message, there are different mediums by which that message can be communicated. And in my book, there's a distinction between those methods. For example, sometimes a person can present something verbally, and we call that a talk. Another time a person presents something verbally, we call that a speech. Another time someone presents something verbally, we call that a lecture. And maybe I don't define these properly, maybe I've just made up this division in my mind, but I feel that these are three very distinct means of communicating. So for example, in a talk, what I would say is the ghalib, what is the dominant feature of a talk, is that the speaker have the ability or somehow bring every individual in the gathering into that gathering. That to me is a talk. Like for example, your father, he wants to sit you down and tell you something. He sits you down one-on-one and you have a talk, right? And he's directly addressing you, and you feel like whatever he's saying directly applies to you, because indeed whatever he's saying applies to you because you're just sitting there one-on-one. Now, there are some people, they have the very unique ability to sit with hundreds of people, but to talk to each individual within those hundreds. One example, I wouldn't be able to show you an example, but I can tell you that my teacher, one of my teachers, who actually became shaheed while I was studying in Pakistan, his name was Maulana Abdul. And I can tell you that one of the most unique characteristics that I saw in this man that I had never seen in anyone else was that he would sit and talk to, we were 1,000 students, we were about 800 students in the madrasa at that time. He would sit down on the mimbar and talk, and when he would talk, you would feel like he was hugging you individually. You would feel like he was embracing you when his words of love came out, and you would feel like he was scolding you when words of rebuke came out. And I thought I had never seen that. Rarely I had seen that, but almost never had I seen that. That, every person in a gathering feels like I am the one being spoken to, that the whole talk is actually for me. It's very, very unique, barakah in a person's words, that you can sit in a gathering that one person can be speaking and hundreds of people can be listening, and every person in the gathering says, subhanAllah, that was for me. That talk was just me. As if everyone else disappears. And this was actually a special characteristic of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam felt that they were the most important of the companions. Most important of the companions. You've heard me say on many occasions that, there was a famous companion who once actually had the audacity, interestingly enough, just to show you the extent that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would emanate this. That he had the audacity to come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and say, Ya Rasulullah, am I better? Or is Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anh better? And he asked the question because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam treated him better than, in his view, he treated him with so much attention that he would see that I'm getting more attention than Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, so therefore I must be better, because the attention of the mashayikh and of the prophets and of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always based on righteousness, right? The tawajjuh that a person gets is always based on righteousness. So he had that question in his mind that I must be better than Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. So when he asked the question, then of course Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh is better. Can't compare there. So then he said, okay, well, let's go for number 2. Is it me or is it Umar radiallahu anh? And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made it very clear that no, Hazrat Umar radiallahu anh is actually better than you. You have to keep things straight. So then he said that then I felt very embarrassed about asking that question. But it became obvious to him that the issue behind it was that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam treated every individual with love. Every person in the gathering felt that they were the most special person in the gathering. Very unique characteristic. It's actually a portion of nubuwah in a way. It's a portion of righteousness, and it's hard to explain in any words beyond that. But so that I consider a talk. So that's one type of address. Put it that address, that might be the best way to state it. The second type of address is a speech. What is a speech? A speech is that someone gets up there and he moves the entire audience based on what is within him. So like, in presidential elections, politicians do this. You don't care about half the things they're talking about. But they'll raise you up, they'll take you through the history of America and say that our forefathers were like this, so you should also care about this issue, when it didn't bother you at all to begin with. Which way it goes, you don't lose any sleep, but they somehow make it your issue. You feel very excited and very moved by these words. Now, they're not addressing you individually. They're not taking you as an individual and making you feel important. They're taking what's in their heart and soul and then raising up the audience and bringing them on that level. So I see that, maybe I'm defining these in my own field. Okay, that's possible, but I see that as a speech. So that's a speech. And that's also important. Sometimes it's required that you be able to pick up the whole audience and move them where you want. And I'll tell you that also this is a unique characteristic, very unique characteristic. And it is sometimes like moving mountains. I can tell you, sometimes you give a talk, an individual gives a talk, and it is the hardest thing in the world to move the entire gathering along. It's harder than moving a mountain. Harder than moving a mountain. Sometimes you look at how much disparity there is in an audience. There's one person, he never comes to the masjid. And then there's another person, he prays 5 times a day, right? And then there's another person, he is the pinnacle of righteousness. And what happens? The speaker wants to move all of them and so has to basically lift the whole gathering up on his shoulders and then move the whole gathering into the exact same, destination, to the exact same point. It's very difficult, very difficult. Very rare are the people that can do that. I'll give you an example. Gosh, I'm really diverting actually from the topic, but anyway. So I'll give you an example. One time, this was in Baltimore, Maryland, maybe 1996, 1997. I was invited to come and visit Shaykh Zulfikar in Maryland. And I arrived at the airport. I went to go see Shaykh Zulfikar. It was very, very early. I had just become his student, and I was still learning the adab and the etiquettes and what all this was about. Anyway, so I got picked up at the airport by someone named Mushtaq, Brother Mushtaq. Now he's Shaykh Mushtaq. There's a big difference in time, I guess. But anyway, he's Shaykh Mushtaq now. At that point, he was Brother Mushtaq. And he takes me to a house. And he takes me to a house, and he says that, Shaykh Zulfikar is going to give an address in this house. He's going to give I guess we should call this a speech. He's going to give a speech in this house. So I begin to see that Shaykh Zulfikar hasn't yet arrived, but all of these guys start pouring in, and all of them are taxi cab drivers. And you could tell that there was one driver who had just rounded up all of his friends. None of them wanted to be there. It was very obvious because Shaykh Zulfikar hadn't come yet, and I was sitting in the gathering, and I'm hearing all this, how much more time do we have to sit here for? And why don't you just give the talk, the Shaykh can then talk to you later on. He was just they were all in a rush to get out of there. You think, are we going to eat first or not? Or what, are you going to feed us chicken? Are you going to feed us gosht? You're going to feed us chicken or meat? They were totally not concerned about being there at all. Not concerned about being there at all. And there were about, I would say, 20 to 30 of them sitting there. So one guy gathered all these guys together, and the one wanted to be there, and you would say that the 20 and 30 could care less. The sooner it was done, the better it would be for them. They just sort of came out of just respect for the guy who brought them. Now, Shaykh Zulfikar walks, and I'm thinking, no way. I'm sitting there. And I had by that time I was just a very, very immature. I'm still immature, but I was very immature at that time. But I had given some talks, in the past, especially at MSA and stuff like that. I said, no way. There's no way that this talk is a failure from the beginning. Shaykh Zulfikar comes in, he sits down, and, people are not respectful, no adab, no etiquette. People are taking food from the side that he's eating from, and, it's just a mess. Anyway, so after they're all done, he basically gets ready to give his talk. He puts his head down, does whatever he has to do. He's making dua, making tawajjuh on the gathering, which the mashayikh always do. I learned that much later. And ajib and amazing that he gives a 1-hour talk. And I will tell you that at the end of that 1 hour, so basically 45-minute talk and 15-minute dua, at the end of that 1 hour, every one of those taxi cab drivers were crying like babies. Crying like babies. I was shocked. You would never expect that to ever happen, especially in that kind of setup. And every one of them was crying like babies. And that was because he gave a speech and he was able to pick up each of them and move them to what was the concern and the fikr and the love for Allah and the fear of Jahannam that was present within him. He was able to shower it upon every single person in the gathering. So that's another type of address. In my mind, I call that a speech, and that also is an important type of address. And the third type of address is a lecture. Lecture is more academic. And what happens there, some professor comes in, and the professor begins to teach you basic principles and points concerning physics or chemistry or literature or whatever it might be, economics. So that is like a lecture. It's a chalkboard-based discussion. And it fulfills a need. It's a human need. Interestingly, Rasulullah ﷺ also taught in this manner. For example, you'll see in hadith that there were some occasions when Rasulullah ﷺ would be highlighting the length of this life compared to the length of the hereafter, and he would draw in the sand. He would draw something. He would draw pathways or draw lines to show how long things would be. So in a way, this was the type of, you can say a type of lecture. It was more of a quote-unquote academic type gathering, but it teaches important points, it leaves certain things behind. So anyway, the whole reason I went into this background is because, in this type of gathering, we have a lot of talks and we have a lot of speeches and we rarely have lectures. And anyway, today I was just in the mood. I said, okay, I'm going to do a lecture. So I asked for this chalkboard because, you always need a chalkboard for a lecture. So if I bore you, just get up and go in the back and do whatever you have to do. And this is just the professor within me, put it that way. So the lecture is going to be about, and actually, in this day and age, I'll tell you that lectures are very important. Because one thing that we have to be cognizant of is that we are a very academic community, irrespective of how we see ourselves. I mean, we would like to be spiritually developed, but there is a definite academic thirst within the vast majority of us sitting in this room here. Why? Because we grew up this way. So, we grew up in first grade and second grade and third grade, and then we go to high school and we go to college, and we're totally used to this method of learning anything. We're used to the blackboard and we're used to a lecture, and we're very comforted by it. And sometimes it's necessary within the deen as well. And because of who we are. It's one of the methods by which we learn. And so you'll see that whereas in the past, in our ulama, they've even highlighted this, and Shaykh Zulfikar is very particular about this in lessons that I've learned from him. In the past, you could simply just tell the community, you have to do this is farad, or you just have to do this is sunnah, or you can't do this is haram. But nowadays what's happening is you can't merely make those statements, you actually have to provide some degree of proof. Now, not that we have to prove the whole deen, but once you can convince a person that you are based on proof, then they begin to accept the rest of what you have to say. So there is some fundamental demand for that. And this is actually what's driving the whole movement, where you see, there's a whole new movement of a group of people that basically decide that they don't need to follow a madhab, they don't need to follow tradition, they don't need to follow the classical scholars. Instead, they're going to pick up the Quran and pick up the hadith and begin to derive rules for themselves. Now, the reason why this type of movement takes hold in this day and age, and we should be very understanding of this, is not because there's a lack of scholarship, but because there is a soil for it. When you have academic, people who are like this tend to be the engineers, tend to be the doctors, tend to be, whenever you look in for example, Egypt or Pakistan or wherever you might be, it tends to be that group of people that is drawn towards this because they actually grew up this way. They were raised this way, their soil is designed this way, and we have yet, we can say the classical scholars are now making this transition, but we have yet to become among those who present in this way. But now as the younger generation has come and the older generation has also begun to change the address a bit, they've begun to provide a little bit of proof, and when you provide a little bit of proof, you quickly content the academic within the person, and then they begin to see that actually all of the deen is actually what this alim is saying is actually all under foundation, because he's clearly shown me that, for example, when he taught me tahara, it was from foundation, it was from Quran, from hadith, so I don't need to now question him on every single ruling in salah or zakah or som or hajj, because it's clear to me that he derived his rulings in this way. And it's interesting, our scholars have always done this. I'll tell you that, I'm not a scholar in that sense. I just had the opportunity to listen, put it that way. As a listener, I sat in Dawra Hadith. And what was the most interesting thing for me when we sat in Dora Hadith? Dora Hadith is the final year of the madrasa, where the students who work hard for 7, 8 years, 9 years sometimes, it's sort of their final year, and they get to reap the benefits of all of their struggle. And what happens is they study the 6 major books of hadith and then some additional books, and they receive the sanad in each of these books. And this is what Mufti Sahib was referring to earlier when he was talking about the sanad for the person who recites and the sanad for the people who listen. So he was in a way referring to this as well. So I had the opportunity to sit in Dora Hadith. And when I sat in Dora Hadith, what blew me away was that the first 5 to 6 months of Dora Hadith, what they did was they took every hadith and used it to build up aspects of, for example, the Hanafi madhab. So what they would do is you would read a hadith, and then after you would read the hadith, they would then say, this, based on this hadith, Imam Abu Hanifa said this, Imam Shafi'i said this, Imam Malik said this, etc., etc. And then they would even give you the rare statements of the various, let's say the less prominent ai''imma. And then we would go back and they would say, and we go back and refute Imam Shafi'i because of this. We go back and refute Imam Malik because of this. And therefore the Ahnaf, the Hanafi madhab, they established this. Now, they did this with every single hadith in Bukhari. In the first portion of Bukhari. Every single hadith in the first portion of Tirmidhi. Every single hadith in the first portion of Abu Dawood, etc., etc. And I'll tell you, it was the most eye-opening thing. Now, we didn't do it for everything. Maybe we only did up to Tahara in some books. Maybe we did Salah in another book and Sawm in another book. But for me, it was sufficient. Because once I saw that the foundation of the deen, for example, the Hanafi madhab was stating about Tahara was totally based on hadith and made absolute sense, Quran and hadith, and then made absolute sense, then I didn't need to say, okay, now I need to prove Salah and prove Zakah and prove Sawm and prove Hajj. Because once I saw that there is an usul, this is what this is called, usul, that there's an usul to the fiqh, that you study the Quran, you study the hadith, and then you derive it based on putting all of these principles together, it made 10,000%. I was absolutely contented, even after having come from such a rigorous academic background, right? Because I did my college, 3/4 of medical school, and then went abroad. So that was, I would say, one of the key lessons I learned. I didn't learn like all the rulings and et cetera, et cetera. I studied them, but these are the big lessons that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. That, I was totally, anybody can come here and tell me anything about, well, brother, you shouldn't follow madhab, we follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He won't be able to knock me. Because I'm just so firmly grounded because I had gone through that I know that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, because this is clearly from Quran and Hadith. And I can highlight even some, in Tahara, the vast majority of it. And, if you've listened to Pearls of Purity, which we did here 5 years ago, part of that occurred when we were discussing wiping over socks, for example, or other aspects of Tahara that, maybe some of those arguments, they remained in my mind at that time when we taught that session. So, lectures sometimes are important. Now, it's interesting that in the path of Tasawwuf is the study of the science of the soul. And I'll tell you that in Tasawwuf, the last method of understanding is lecture. Because Tasawwuf is the one science of this deen that is not academic, but actually it requires experience. The key feature of Tasawwuf is that it's experiential. And it's funny because you go into Islamic libraries and you say, okay, brother, show me the section on Quran. It'll be huge. Show me the section on tafsir. It'll be huge. Show me the section on hadith. It'll be enormous. Show me the section on tasawwuf. There's just a handful of books. Just a handful of books. Because tasawwuf and suluk is not learned from a book. It's learned from a person. And tasawwuf and suluk is not an academic exercise. It is a spiritual exercise. Just to prove this point. Imam Ghazali, rahmatullah alayh. Now you've all heard about the famous Imam Ghazali, but when you go through his life story, you learn some very interesting principles concerning suluk. Now, what he had done and what was his background, he was an academically rigorous Islamic scholar. This was who he was. Now, in his academic rigor, what he decided was that he was going to study the various aspects of the deen at that day in that day and age, to see what was truly truthful and what was coming from the outside. So, for example, he studied philosophy Then he studied religion. Then he studied politics. He studied the Shias, okay, et cetera, et cetera. And what he would do is he would academically study these. He would come up with academic arguments. He would refute and accept what he should. He would refute and remove what he shouldn't take, and then he would prove and accept what he should take. Now, what he came to the conclusion eventually was that the essence of the deen was lacking in this academic pursuit. The essence of the deen was lacking in this academic pursuit. And that he actually needed to go and to learn tasawwuf to see whether he could find the science of the soul. Whether he could develop himself into the Muslim that he had read about. Whether he could develop himself into the Muslims that the companions were. And the tabi'in, and the tabi'in, and the righteous after them. So he actually, in his mind, he had decided that the only way I'm now going to come to the end of my pursuit is to study tasawwuf. To study the science of developing the soul and to practice it. But he says that I was the top lecturer in the area where he lived, the Iraq, Baghdad type area. He was the top lecturer, and there was no way he could resign. I mean, you think about it, he was sort of like the provost, of a university. You don't just resign and walk off and say, I'm going to go live in a minaret, for 2 years. People wouldn't accept that, and also it wasn't necessarily acceptable to him. He says, I knew I had to study tasawwuf. I knew I had to study the science of spirituality to develop myself to see whether I could truly experience this deen, because it wasn't happening academically. So he says that every day when I woke up in the morning, I made the intention I'm going to go today. And I couldn't get myself to go. And for 6 months this happened. Every day he woke up, every day he made the intention, and he couldn't go. He just couldn't get himself to do it. Until one day, 6 months after continuously trying to go, he actually lost his voice. Now obviously if you're a lecturer, and you have to give a lecture, and you don't have a voice, you're worthless. Essentially. I mean, you can write still, but you're very limited. So he says that was my sign that I had to go. So what does he do? He leaves his position, he resigns from his position, and he goes and he isolates himself in Damascus, in a minaret in the Umawi Masjid. And you can still go and visit that place today. And it's very funny because when I first met Shaykh Zulfikar, my shaykh, my teacher of Tasawwuf, I was just a college student, a third year. I had just graduated from college. Finished in 3 years and graduated. So I had some extra time off because I finished early. So I had some extra time off and I asked him what I should do. I had a summer and a few more days. And I said, I want to go study Arabic in Damascus. He said, yeah, you should go. And I said, I also want to sit in the minaret where Imam Ghazali used to sit, and I want to do my muraqabah there. He said, even better. I want to practice tasawwuf at that same spot because I had read about it. So he said, even better. So actually I got the opportunity to go there. I studied a little bit of Arabic and I got to sit right there in that same masjid, right next to that minaret. And, I used to do some dhikr over there. And, so anyway, I'm just remembering this. It's just a tangent. But the point I'm trying to make is that in order to study tasawwuf, it's very rare that you're going to find books. It's very rare that you're going to find lectures. So, Imam Ghazali, he made the sacrifice. What happened? He studied the science. He found a shaykh. He studied the science of tasawwuf. He spent many years doing so. At the end, he became Imam Ghazali. The Imam Ghazali that we remember in this day and age, the one who wrote Ihya Ulumuddin, the one who just, had a tremendous effect on the deen. We call him the Hujjah of Islam. We call him a reviver of the deen. All of that occurred after his study of tasawwuf. After he retired as a lecturer. And then he went and studied tasawwuf. Then he says, in tasawwuf I found the reality of the deen. Despite being the most academically, you can say the most academically developed and qualified individual in the deen, it was when I came to tasawwuf that I found the reality of this deen. That I actually found Allah. That I actually found the book of Allah. That I actually found the messenger of Allah. And then he wrote Ihya Ulumuddin, and now you see how accepted that book is that, even in this day and age, you always see college students carrying it around. Even the non-Muslims study it, and they take benefit from it. That all happened afterwards. That wasn't his academic, exercise before the science of tasawwuf. All of this came after. All of his established works. So, what I was trying to highlight is that tasawwuf, for the most part, is a experiential exercise. But on very rare occasions, Shaykh Zulfikar has actually sat me down and given me some lectures on tasawwuf. And this happened actually when I was studying in Pakistan. He used to have a yearly gathering, and at that yearly gathering, he would have 3 days of the general public. And in the general public, you always give speeches and you always give, you give talks. Sometimes you give talks and you hug a little bit, you scold a little bit. Sometimes you give a speech, you move them from here to here. Then what happens is everybody leaves after that 3 days. And then he has a special 7-day gathering for the scholars. Only the scholars. The scholars and foreign guests and some physicians and engineers and mostly you can say the people with some higher education, some secondary, tertiary type education. And then in that gathering, it was lecture. And when he gave us those series of lectures, those for me opened up a door to Tasawwuf that I felt was essential for me. Because in this day and age, Tasawwuf gets so knocked, you know. You come into an environment of academics and people will argue with you and they'll start trying to say, well, where did you get this from, brother? You're just making up all this stuff. You know, I've never seen this written anywhere. This is all new. This is bid'ah, etc., etc. So to some degree, because we are academically challenged in our need to develop spiritually, you actually have to have a little taste. Just like in fiqh, you actually have to have a little taste of how we prove things so that you then become acceptable of the methods of the traditional scholars. In the same way, you do need a little bit of the science of Tasawwuf. That's what I call this. You need a little bit of the science of Tasawwuf so that you can see that actually this all makes sense. So that's what I want to do right now. Now I wasted half an hour actually, unfortunately. Now we have very limited time because I don't want to drag this thing on. So maybe it'll be part 1 today and part 2 on another even night. So, and anyway, there's a series of 7 lectures that he gave us and every one of them was important, but one of them always remains very firm in my mind and that's the one that I want to share with you right now. So the essence of this lecture that Shaykh Zulfikar gives is very important for everyone. Okay, we're good? All right. Okay, so anyway, what I was saying is that there's 2 spheres of creation. One sphere of creation is created by Allah's command, kun fayakun, clearly stated in the Quran. The other sphere of creation is created by tadrijan, over time, and that is clearly elucidated, for example, by the ayah, huwa alladhi khalaqa as-samawati wal-ard fi sittati ayyam, in 6 days. So now these are 2 distinct manners of creation. And these then form the 2 separate worlds. Now, the scholars of Tasawwuf, in their academic mode, they basically highlight that what is everything above the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is created kun fayakun. And everything beneath the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually alam al-khalq, it's created over time. So for example, what's above the arsh of Allah? Jannah, okay, the angels, etc. I mean, they predominantly reside above the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, they come down into the earth as well. So that all of these things are created with just Allah saying kun fayakun. And everything beneath the arsh, so you come down, the skies, okay? And beneath the arsh also is the ground and the earth and the leaves and the trees, etc. Those are all created over time. Okay. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because it's essential to understand tafsir. Otherwise, you would get confused in your mind and say, well, which one is it? Is it kun fayakun or is it, fi sittati ayyam? But also, it's important because this discussion really takes it reaches its pinnacle in understanding human beings, understanding us. We have to understand ourselves, right? In understanding us. Why? Because we are the unique creation that is actually a composite of both worlds. Part of us is from alam al-khalq, and the other part of us is from alam al-amr. So, how so? The soul that a human being has, our soul that rotates around us and brings life to this body, this soul is actually from alam al-amr. Comes in the Quran. Yas'alunaka anir ruh. They ask you, O Messenger of Allah, yani the Sahaba ask you, O Messenger of Allah, about the ruh. Then what do we say? What's the response? Qulir ruh min amri rabbi. Min amri rabbi is from the command of my Lord. Okay? So say that the ruh is from the alam al-amr. This is one interpretation of that verse. So the ruh is from alam al-amr. It's from the commanded. It arises from kun fayakun. I mean, the ruh does not start as a little clot and then become an embryo and then become a fetus and then become a baby. No. And then grow up to be an adult. No. It's just there. It just is. Okay, now the second component of a human being is what? The body. We're two people. We're just we're only made up of two parts: a soul and a body and a soul. We always talk about the body and the soul. The body is clearly created. It's not from amr. For example, khalaqal insan. Khalaqal insan. Look, khalq, right? So insan is created, and then we know from Quran that clearly we're told beautifully in the Quran. That just is verified now by modern science that first man starts out as a little clot, then they become the embryo, etc., until they're born as a baby. And even when the body is born as a baby, the body, the jism of the human being, right? The jism then keeps growing and growing and growing until the person becomes about 30, maybe 27, 30 years old. And then the body reaches its full mature potential. So you can even see that tadrijan, over time, the body grows. So the soul of a human being is from alam al-amr, and the body of a human being is from where? Alam al-khalq. Am I losing you, or is this straightforward, right? It's not so hard. Okay, so that's the key principle you have to keep in mind. Now I said to you, and I'm rushing through this, and I could actually talk a lot more on this topic, but we don't have time. Now I said to you that this understanding is important for you to be able to understand 90% of problems that arise in life. So this is now where the discussion really takes hold, and why it's essential for a group of individuals who have the ability to understand, to take these simple concepts home and then be able to churn on them a little bit. So let me walk you through some very, very basic principles. So now, derivatives from what I just taught. Number one, that alam al-amr is sustained by alam al-amr. And alam al-khalq is sustained by alam al-khalq. So let's take it from backwards. Now, alam al-khalq means things. So what I'm trying to say is that whatever is derived from the created world will only be sustained by those things from the created world. So for example, your body, is it created or is it commanded? Created, right? So now, you think about all the things that support the body. Are they created or commanded? Think about it. They're all derived from the earth. For example, you wear clothes. Where do your clothes come from? They come from cotton, which comes from the earth, or they come from wool, which come from sheep, right? From animals, which are also from the earth. They're also created from mud, right? So you can see that the clothing that the body requires comes from alam al-khalq, comes from the created world. The food we eat comes from where? Comes from either the ground, crops, or from animals, which eat crops and grow. But all of that comes from the created world. The houses we live in, what are they made of? Wood, brick, mud, right? Cement. So where are all these things derived from? They're all derived from the ground, or from trees, which are also derived from the ground. So what does it highlight to you? That the key essential things that your body requires all come from the same dimension in which the body was created. Is that clear? Okay. Now, just in the same way, your soul, the sustenance of the soul will come from the things from that same dimension. So what's from that dimension? The angels are from that dimension. Goodness is from that dimension. Jannah, these types of things are all from that dimension. They're not tangible things, they're spiritual things, meaning the soul will be maintained by spiritual things. Now, you might say, well, that's very simple, but I'll tell you that this is the problem with 99.9% of people alive today have misunderstood this concept. And we also have gotten caught up in the misunderstanding of this concept. Why? Because we have somehow mistakenly deemed that our happiness in this life is based on what we possess. So when we feel that our soul is down and we feel that our soul is not elevated, we begin to think that in order to elevate the soul, we need to have a nice house. If you have a nice house, then you'll be at peace and you'll be happy. That we have to eat good food, because only if you eat very, very fine food, whole foods, right, will you be happy. I mean, these guys are making people buy, people get convinced to buy such expensive organic type foods, thinking what? That it's going to make their soul happy. They say food for the soul. It's their advertisement, food for the soul. It's deceptive. That's deceptive advertising, because they don't understand these principles. All right? And you see that, you see this, you see a woman, she gets depressed, she goes shopping. Well, where's she going to find in the mall? There's nothing in the mall that's going to serve her spirit. Nothing in the mall that's going to quench her thirst. She thinks that if she buys another pair of shoes, that somehow she's going to feel better about herself. Or that if she buys a new shade of lipstick, somehow she's going to feel better about herself. And it's so sad because this is the deception that has been sent upon us by the corporate world. We've been deceived to think that somehow the shape of the body, makes you feel better. And this is all advertising is based on this principle. Because the demand of a human being is not the body. The demand of the human being is to elevate the soul. People have souls, and that soul cries out to be elevated. It's the nature of a human being. And what happens is that the advertisers and the corporate world and the world around us recognizes this, and they feed it, but they feed it with things of the dunya, things of khalq, and deceiving us to think that somehow we'll be happy in this way. If we look like this model, then we'll be happy. Or if we can't look like her, at least we can dress the way she dresses, because then we'll feel like her. She's smiling on the magazine, so then I'll be smiling as well. If I wear a certain type of gym shoe, then I'm going to be really the coolest kid on the block. Right? If I comb my hair down this way, I'm going to feel much better about myself. I'm going to feel cool and good. Right? And so what happens? We get caught up in fashion. We get caught up in material things. We get caught up in consuming. And as we consume and then deceive ourselves, we get depressed. And that's why you see that you go into any medical clinic and you see that one of the most common drugs prescribed are antidepressants. Because what's happening is we've become so depressed and it's a cycle. We just keep feeding materialism, and we never quench the thirst of the soul. It's so scientifically obvious, but people don't see it because they're so bombarded with this world. That's why TV is so deadly. That's why advertising is so deadly, because this is what we're taught to believe. And it's very unfortunate, And this is what Islam does. Islam removes the shackle of the dunya. It teaches you that all this stuff doesn't matter. That actually the best you'll ever feel in your life is when you're away from food. Look, you think about, if I ask any Muslim, any normal Muslim, just that has an iota of iman in their heart, and I say to them, tell me, when did you best experience your deen? When did you best experience your deen? Is he going to say, I went to Paris and I ate at this restaurant and I stayed in this hotel. Brother, I was just on fire that night. It's funny, right? But no, nobody's going to say that. What are they going to say? They're going to say, I happened to walk into itikaf. I didn't know what was going on. All these people were wearing white. There was all this nude all over the place. These guys didn't eat all day. They prayed all night. They were just, they were sweating. They weren't comfortable. Their knees hurt. And I never experienced anything better. That's what you're going to say. You're going to say the pinnacle of my feeling good about myself was actually in Ramadan. And I'll tell you, you walk around this masjid and you see all these people. You feel like I would just give up my whole life if this would just continue until the day I die. There's nothing out there. There's nothing out there for us. I mean, it's so obvious. But it only, unfortunately, you don't see it until you come into an enlightened environment. That's why I say this i'tikaf is essential. It's essential because it wakes us up. Now look, what's happening in Ramadan? In Ramadan, we don't have our luxurious, double setting bed where your wife can set her dial and your husband can set his dial and everybody's now at peace. We're all sleeping on this ground over here. People step on you while you sleep over here, right? And we enjoy it. You remember it. I was just telling one of the brothers, I don't know, who was it? Saad, did you step on Fatima? That 5 years ago? Someone stepped on my daughter, and dislocated her shoulder 5 years ago. She was 5 years old. I don't know if it was Saad. No. But anyway, this was the first i'tikaf, first ICC i'tikaf. There's many memories of the first ICC i'tikaf. It started with 10 brothers, but that was the seed that germinated into what goes on in this day. And that was the best i'tikaf, by the way. I mean, it's always like that, Whoever's here first, they always tend to maybe the uncles remember, but there were just a few of us in those days. So my daughter was sleeping and someone stepped on her and dislocated her shoulder on the last day of i'tikaf. It's a long story what happened after that. But the point is that, and she didn't cry. She was just walking around like this. She couldn't move. But the point was it wasn't comfortable, and it never is comfortable. And the masjid was not even there, not even this half. I mean, what over here was some room. The wall ended right here. We would go in that room and we'd all fit, just this little square. We would all fit. The final dua was actually in that room. And it was so not crowded that I remember one day my wife wanted to come have iftar with me. So I said, just come into the masjid. My wife and I had the whole room to ourselves and we just ate iftar comfortably over there. It was one of the days. I mean, you just think about it. That's not going to happen. There's no space here now. So, I mean, what I'm trying to highlight to you is that it's actually when you leave this consuming and this materialism and all this stuff that you actually feel the best about yourself. And it's actually when you get caught up in all of this, what, the house I live in, the bed I sleep on, the sheets, and how many cotton thread there is, and the food that I eat, and you get caught up in all of this that actually you will be the most depressed. Ajib, that the most wealthy country in the world and the most wealthy community in the world is also the most depressed community in the world. And that as they begin to export their McDonald's and Gap, etc., they depress the rest of the world as well. And with them also travels all of the antidepressants. So we should recognize this simple principle. And that's why I'm saying that this is so important, why I feel that even a lecture, in the middle of Itikaf, you would think that's the last place to have a lecture. But actually, in my mind, if you're a little bit, given our academic background, you have to understand this one simple principle. That if you desire to be happy, I'm just being honest with you. We're not even talking about some high pinnacle in the deen. I just want you to be happy, okay? And I want your families to be happy, and your kids to be happy, and your wives and your parents to be happy. If you desire happiness, you cannot make your goal alam al-khalq. Because happiness is a characteristic of the soul. It's a characteristic of the soul, and it will only arise when you feed the soul. But if you keep the soul hungry and you feed the body, you will never be happy. You will always be upset. You'll be angry. You'll be angry with the world because you'll blame everyone as to why you don't feel good. This is what we do. We get angry with our wives. We say, you didn't let me go to the masjid. Well, she's not stopping you from going to the masjid, but you have to always get angry at someone because this is the result. You're not happy. You start boiling up. You start getting upset at people. You start blasting. You just let out fire every time you speak when you can. Not at work because you have to respect everybody there. When you go home, then the real animal comes out. So the point is that simple principle that what feeds the khalq is khalq. So the body, yes, you need to sustain it. The Sharia establishes that. You need to eat halal food. You need to have a house. You need to wear clothes. And all of those things, the Sharia and the Sunnah establish the extent to which you should do so that you can balance the growth of your soul. Okay? So I think that is very, very simple and very, very, just any human being should be able to understand this principle. And it's funny because I could give this lecture to a bunch of non-Muslims and you can make $1 million book out of it because that's what they read. They read these books, But these are very simple principles. This is what the Tasawwuf is all about. What do we teach people? We teach people to disconnect from the dunya and to reconnect with the akhirah. And that if you do so, when you begin to recite Quran, when you begin to give sadaqah, when you begin to sacrifice your own conveniences for the sake of others, there are anwarat and fuyudat and barakat that begin to come into the soul. And they power the soul, and they cause the soul to become elevated. And this is what I was speaking about last night when I talked about, I know it was probably very difficult for some people in the audience to understand because it was a little bit heavy towards the end. But when I was talking about the journey of the soul, that's what I was referring to. That this soul has the ability to receive the barakat, the fuyudat, the anwarat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those always arise from deeds. When you do good, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawajjuh comes towards you. So it's the sacrificing of this. Rather than amassing wealth, which is just a bunch of pieces of paper or gold coins, which is all from khalq, you actually have to spend that wealth, and when you spend it, then the barakat begins to come into your life. Rather than eating food, you have to limit the food and feed others, and it's when you feed others that the barakat begins to come into your life. Rather than worrying about your own housing, you should worry about the housing of the orphans and the needy, and when you do so, the barakat begin to come into your life, and that feeds the soul, elevates the soul, and makes you a very happy person. Very happy person. And you've heard me say this as well. I've been everywhere. Alright? I have a very funny background. I've seen it all. I've done it all. I've been everywhere. Now, I had the opportunity, and you've heard me say this before, to study at University of Chicago Medical School, and they've got this, millions of dollars of medical school equipment building, just the state-of-the-art systems. And I also had the opportunity to study in the madrasa, and I ended up in a madrasa that was a very, very tough place to be. This was not a foreigner's madrasa. I was the only foreigner there. And we were in the jungle. Scorpions, monkeys, wild animals, everything. Snakes, big, big black snakes. Not snakes. You guys think snakes, you think this. This, thick, black snakes, just crawling around. And I'll tell you that we slept on the floor, we sat in 120-degree heat, and the walls were made of clay. It was like an oven. Barely had any water to drink, because every time you drink, you get diarrhea. And I'll tell you that the ecstasy ecstasy, I call it, that I experienced in that environment over that 2 years, I have never experienced anywhere else in my life. And I will also tell you that I spent the vast majority of my life, and I still do to this day, wondering when I'll hit the next phase and when will this part of my life be over. When I was in 7th grade, I couldn't wait to get out of junior high. I can't wait till I'm out of junior high, I'll be in high school. When I was in high school, I couldn't wait to be out of high school, I'll be in college. When I was in college, I couldn't wait to be out of college, finally I'll get to medical school. When I was in medical school, I said, when I get out of medical school, I'll be happy, I'll be an attending. Now I'm an attending, I'm saying, okay, I'm a junior attending. When I'm an assistant professor, then I'll be an associate professor. Finally, I'll be a full professor, and then I'll be happy. Then what's going to happen? I'm going to be a full professor, and then I'll have to retire. Then I'm supposed to be happy. It never ends. You're never happy, and you go in your grave, and you lost your whole life. But that period of life, when I studied abroad, whatever, the 2 to 3 years, and, Mufti Saab can sit down and tell you, it's funny because anytime you sit with anybody who sat in a madrasa, they always say the same thing. Those days were the best. I used to sit, Mufti Abdul Rahman Mangera, you probably know him, he's a very famous Mufti, and he's a very knowledgeable Mufti. We used to sit together and we used to talk, and we both agreed. I mean, it would be just a common theme whenever we would get together that we would talk about stories and we would say, those were the best times. Those were the best times. And despite the difficulties of those times. And I'll tell you that it was the only time in my life where I looked the other way. Whenever I used to drive to the airport, I would drive down to have this road called Airport Road. I would drive down that road, and every time I drive down that road, there would be tears down my eyes because I would be thinking that one day I'm going to drive and I'm not going to drive back. I would go and pick up people. But then in the back of my mind, there was always this fear that one day I'm going to drive and I'm not going to drive back. And I remember that Maulana Kamal was my very close friend from college, was with me that last day. I was just rapidly packing things up, and I drove down that, and I told him, I said, and he was coming to start, I was leaving. I said, you have no idea. You have no idea. We'll talk when you're done. And he went through the exact same experience, although his continues because he's still making those sacrifices. So anyway, the point again is that, over there we had nothing. And University of Chicago Medical School, we had every facility available, air conditioning, multiple drinks of your choice. You want a Coke for in the morning, and you want a coffee in the afternoon, and you want this and you want that. It's all available to you, and everyone's computers, etc. Multiple light bulbs and LCDs and 6-7 different Mac or IBM, or which one do you want? It's all there. But that ecstasy was not there. That ecstasy was not there. So, okay, this is one very simple point. Now, derivative number 2 from this discussion. And that is that in order to grow khalq, the body, you have to provide balance. Okay? And the Sharia teaches us this. So what am I trying to say? You can't just eat McDonald's French fries every day, right? Or you wouldn't eat McDonald's French fries anyway. But whatever, let's say you can't eat French fries every day and expect that your body's going to grow to be healthy. Every mother knows that you have to teach your child to eat vegetables, right? That you have to teach your child to drink milk. That you have to teach your child to eat grains. So much so that we have the RDA recommending all of these different food pyramids, and that how many calories should come from this, how many calories should come from that, etc., etc. Okay? So everybody knows that if you want to grow the body, you must provide it balance of nutrients. Okay, now let me tell you that what we don't understand is that if you want to grow the khalq, you must also, number 1, provide it nutrients. And number 2, you must provide it a balanced set of nutrients. So first point, which often we don't understand, is that you have to provide it nutrients. You cannot not do dhikr and leave Quran and leave the masjid and leave the company of the righteous and leave giving sadaqah and then expect that you're going to feel good. Your soul will constrict and die. And die. Okay? Now, when you read the ahadith that say, for example, a man who misses 3 Jummahs, it's sealed. Right? You've heard these hadith? A person who misses 3 Jummahs in a row, what happens? His heart gets sealed. Or a person sins and sins and sins until eventually his heart becomes sealed. What is the sealing of the heart? The sealing of the heart is spiritual death. Just like if you don't give the baby milk for 5 days, the baby will die, and then you can scream and cry as much as you want, but you will not be able to bring it back to life. If a person neglects the soul such that they don't even go to Jummah prayer, boom, the soul dies. And no matter how much you scream and cry and want it to come back to life, it will be dead. You will be walking around with a dead plant in your heart. You can water it then, you can do anything you want, it won't come back. Now, the ajib thing is that once the body dies, there's no hope. Nobody would ever say that the month of Ramadan is coming, this dead baby is going to come back to life. But the ajib thing about the month of Ramadan is that a person can come dead into the month of Ramadan and Allah can bring the soul back to life. That's the miracle of Ramadan. You should think about it that way. See, if you don't understand the science, then you don't understand the miracle of Ramadan. This is the miracle of Ramadan, that a person could kill the soul, but it will come back to life. It is as if a baby came out of the grave and began to speak. That's how I see it. And again, that's why the gathering of itikaf is so important, because some people come in here with dead souls. I'm one of them, I know. We come in here either we come here with souls that are dead, or they're on the respirator. Illa masha'Allah, there's some rare individual that was growing their soul, and they come here to get fertilizer. Illa masha'Allah. There are very, very rare people like that. And those who were called the Sahaba, Tabayin, Tabayin, and our Mashayikh, they elevated themselves. They came in and they had new fruits growing from their soul in the month of Ramadan. But people like us, we come here to survive. It's a question of life and death. It's not a question of apples and oranges being produced from this tree. Life and death. So for us, these gatherings are essential. We don't miss them. Fine, you can't be here for 10 days, but you have to come for at least one. You got to come for 2. You have to come for 5. And you have to then fulfill the schedule of the gathering, because that's what brings us back to life. Very simple. I mean, we all have minds. We've developed them. We've studied in college. Tell me if I'm telling you something that makes no sense. Stand up and tell me this makes no sense. And if it does, I'll stop. But this is just very, very simple principles. And this is what it means when we say that Allah has sealed their hearts. So when you study in the Quran or you study in Hadith that their hearts are sealed, this is what that means, that their soul died. And subhanAllah, that this is the power of the kalima, that a kafir who fought the Prophet ﷺ on the battlefield could come back and say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, and boom, he gets a new soul. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's the power of words, that the tongue from khalq can utter such words that can revive the soul completely. So, and it's another detailed discussion. This is part of what the bay'ah is all about. When a person makes bay'ah, it's kind of like becoming a new Muslim in the sense that they make tawbah from their past sins and they again take the kalima, and then that rejuvenates their soul. Alright, so my point here was that you need, number 1, that you have to feed the soul for it to grow. And if you don't feed it, it will die. Okay? Number 1. Number 2, you must feed it a balanced diet. So you can't just say, I'm only going to do this dhikr and then expect that your soul will grow proportionately. You must do some Quran, you must do some salawat, you must do some istighfar, you must do some making sure you're in the company of the righteous, you must do some coming into the masjid. And when you add the components together, this is the RDA recommended dietary allowance for the soul. And this is what the Mashayikh have given us. So when you see these prescriptions, what they're doing is they're picking out from Quran and Hadith those prescriptions that are necessary to balance a human being. These aren't bidat. If you have a problem with that, then start with the RDA. That's like saying, brother, Rasulullah ﷺ never said that you need 2 glasses of milk a day. Astaghfirullah. Astaghfirullah. I mean, some things they make sense. You're not breaking the rules and principles of hadith. You're selecting out the hadith. The hadith say do salawat. The hadith say la ilaha illallah. The hadith say you should recite the Quran. The hadith say, etc., etc. We put these things together, create a package, and present it to the sadiq. That's what suluk is. That is what tasawwuf is all about. It is the method by which we feed the soul the recommended daily allowance. And in that mechanism, right, we then provide a ready-made meal. So that you don't have to go seeking these things out. And if you went and sought them out in hadith, you would find them. I mean, what are the things that grow the soul? Reflection grows the soul. If a person sits and thinks about his cell phone all day, the soul dies. If a person sits and thinks about the sky, the soul grows. If a person sits and thinks about stocks all day, the soul dies. If a person sits and thinks about Allah's creation of the honeybee, the soul grows. So again, reflection can grow or kill the soul, right? The dhikr of the tongue can grow or kill the soul. Salah grows or kills the soul. Alright? So if you leave salah, you kill the soul. If you pray salah, you grow the soul. Very simply. So when we prescribe various acts, what we are doing is prescribing for you the necessary requirements to grow your soul. And you'll see that this gathering is a balance of those as well. For example, Mufti Sahib has established this recitation of the Quran and completing the Quran, and so that's a portion of growing our soul. Then there's prayer. That's part of growing the soul. Then there's academic learning. So for example, we have the hadith sessions in the morning. That's part of growing the soul. All right? And then you've got we have the dhikr after asr. When we sit down and do that silent dhikr, it's part of growing the soul. It contains the salawat that you need. It contains some ayat of the Quran. It contains some reflection about the greatness of Allah. It's very, very carefully calculated. It's ready-made designer for you to be able to simply just take. So this is what we call tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is the science of growing the soul, based on the understanding of our scholars and taking derivatives from Quran and Hadith. All right, so that was the second point I wanted to make. Third point is that the ruh and the jism, the body and the soul, they compete for one space. The body and the soul compete for one space. So basically, the human being is a box. And within that box, they have the ability to either grow their body or grow their soul. And if the body overgrows, the soul becomes constricted. And if the soul overgrows, the body could potentially even die. All right? So you have to understand that relationship, because you always want to grow the soul and constrict the body. And the best mechanism to do that is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why, for example, Shaykh Zulfikar used to say to me that if you want to know what is the best method for a salik to progress on the path of tasawwuf, it's always through the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The sunnah teaches you how much attention you should give to the body, and how much attention you should give to the soul, and it balances it completely. And you find both extremes in hadith. For example, there were some companions that came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they said, we're going to fast every day, and we're not going to go to our wives anymore. And what did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say to them? No, I fast and I break my fast. I spend time in prayer and I spend time with my family. Highlighting that you cannot try to grow the soul so much that you kill the body, because it's detrimental to the human being. But at the same time, we're told that when you eat, for example, eat 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Should eat 1/3 portion food, 1/3 portion drink, 1/3 portion air. And what is that? This is the sunnah of eating, so that when a human being consumes this much, the body will be sustained and will grow, but will be not overtaking of the soul. So you see people who overeat, or people who put so much emphasis on food, their soul dies very quickly, because they're just caught up in what they're eating all the time. A person who sleeps too much, right? Their soul dies very quickly, because they're just feeding the body. The body requires sleep. The soul doesn't require sleep. By the way, that's another derivative, which I didn't even write down. The vast majority of people complain about their sleep schedules today. And you can write books, and you can find books and books and books in Barnes and Nobles about sleep. I will tell you all of sleep boils down to my talk. Why? Because the soul requires no sleep, and the body could sleep for 10 years straight. The soul requires no sleep, but the body could sleep for 10 years straight. So the individual who feeds their body and never feeds their soul, they need 12 hours of sleep a day, and they wake up and they still feel groggy. It's amazing. You think about outside of Ramadan, some of us, we go to sleep, we sleep through Isha, we sleep through Fajr, we sleep through Dhuhr, we wake up at Asr, and we're still tired. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. Why? Because the soul is dead. And the body is turned into an animal. It can hibernate for a week if you let it sleep. Just that the parents keep knocking at the door. Right? So again, the problem here is what? Is that the body was way too emphasized and the soul was let to die. Now, if you want to be someone... Now, then people say that, well, the solution is my alarm clock. I want to get up and pray tahajjud, brother. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to set my alarm clock. And I'm not going to set any alarm clock. You've heard my example as well. I'm going to set adhan of Mecca in one alarm clock, and adhan of Medina on the other alarm clock on the other side of the room. And brother, you're going to see what's going to happen tonight. What happens tonight? He shuts off both and goes back to sleep. That's what happens. Not here, outside of i'tikaf. Why? Because the body, that doesn't wake the body up. The soul is dead anyway. You can play it adhan of Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. It's not going to change anything. The soul is almost dead. It's on the ICU. When somebody's on the ICU, they can't get up and play ball. They're laying in bed. Of course, they're not going to be able to do anything. So what has to happen is that if you desire for sleep to come under control, the simple solution is to limit the growth of the body based on the sunnah. Fast on Mondays and Thursdays. Fast on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of the month. Give charity. Simplify your possessions. Disconnect yourself from the dunya. Stop feeding the mind. The mind is part of the body, by the way. When you feed it with all this news and stock quotes and what does Obama have to say about healthcare and all this, that kills you. I know it's funny, but it kills you. It's very dangerous, the amount that we feed the mind. So we have to be very careful about what we do, with these senses. Music is death. Music is poison. Music is poisoned. It's already elucidated in hadith as well. It grows nifaq the way that water grows crops. And here we got, iPhone, not iPhone, what do you call that thing? iPod, that not only music, but you can change the songs every 10 seconds. And you can have the 10,000 songs on one iPod. 10,000 poisons. Which person wants to buy? And there's a line when the new one comes out. We should tell the truth. It's 10,000 poisons. This one holds 5,000 poisons. Brother, mine holds 10,000 poisons. What are you talking about? Ajib. And then brother, Zayd, look what I brought you for Eid. Alhamdulillah. 10,000 poisons. It's ajib. Ajib, human beings are ajib. Because we don't understand what we shoot ourselves in the foot, then we cry. Anyway, the point is very, very simple. What I'm trying to highlight to you is that basically what you have to remember is that you have to balance the body and the soul. Now how did I get on that tangent? I had something very important. Sleep. That if you want to control your sleep, then what you have to do is you have to limit the body and grow the soul. And if you do so, I will tell you that you will actually become one of the most efficient human beings on earth. Because everybody has to sleep 10 hours, and if you only have to sleep 5, now you're living a double life. So some people erroneously think that if I become righteous, I'm going to do bad in school. Okay? Actually, it's the other way around. If you become righteous, you're going to actually be able to defeat your competition. Because they all have to sleep all the time. They're always tired. They're drinking coffee. Why do these guys gulping coffee all the time? Coffee is like a drug. People are constantly taking coffee. They can't stand up without coffee anymore. Because it's the only thing that gets them up in the morning. They have to chemically induce, a state of wakefulness. But, which coffee were the Sahaba drinking? They didn't need it. They would sleep for 2 hours. There was no body to even feed with sleep. It was, they had almost killed their bodies. They had become true men. Men, La tulhihim tijaratun, right? That tijara wouldn't even distract them from the dhikr of Allah. Allah says that these were men, rijal. Ajib. Allah created them and then they became men. Like Shaykh Zulfikar says, it's easy to create cars. It's easy to make planes. It's easy to build computers. It's easy to build cell phones. It's hard to make men. Tasawwuf makes men, makes people, makes human beings. That's what the science of Tasawwuf is about. So again, what I was trying to highlight to you is that if you really want to control your sleep, what you have to do is cut down the body. And you ask yourself, which period of time in your life did you sleep the least? Ramadan. Especially the last 10 days of Ramadan. Why? Because you're doing that. What is Ramadan all about? Ramadan is all about killing the body and raising the soul. And again, this was all from this principle, which I was trying to highlight, which is that the soul and the body live in one constricted space. So that's why you are able to, if you decrease the body, the soul will automatically fill in that space. The soul will automatically, it's like a balloon, it'll just fill in that space. So when you come into the month of Ramadan, you automatically grow. And now you think, what is Ramadan? Ramadan is no food, no drink, no relations. These are all things that the body desires. Food is part of the body. It's from khalq. Relations with your wife is part of the body. It's interacting with khalq. Okay? This is the things that animals do. Eat, drink, and sleep. Right? So all of these things are all part of khalq. So Ramadan naturally decreases our interaction with khalq, allowing amr to grow. And now this is the scientific view of Ramadan, right? I'm looking at it theoretically. And then we all begin to experience a new state in our iman. We all begin to experience a new state in our iman. So That's an important point. Okay, now I've made that point. Okay. Should we stop there? Then I'll have nothing to talk about tomorrow. You'll have emptied out me. Okay, anyway, we'll just finish this. 3 more points. Okay, next point is that if you want to gauge the state of your ruh, then the method by which you do that is to shut down the body. Now, okay, Midhat is sitting in the back, okay? Midhat, he does a lot of machine testing and machine development, and he'll tell you that when you want to fix one part of the machine and you want to test it, you have to shut down the rest of the machine and then do testing on that part only. Okay? So in the same way, when you have a body and when you have a human being and the human being is made up of the body and the soul, right? What happens is if you want to test the soul, the best method of testing the soul is to shut the body down. And when you shut the body down, if you put the soul in an environment of good and the soul reacts negatively, okay, it means that the body is pulling it away. Well, let's put it this way. If you restrict the body and you feed the soul and then the body starts fighting back, it means that the body has too much power. Does that make sense? So you have a body and a soul. Now you put yourself in a situation where the body gets constricted. You just squeeze on it a little bit. And when you squeeze on it, the body says, I don't like this, and tries to push away. That tells you that the body has been too developed and it's going to be tough for you to feed the soul. Do you understand the example? Now let me give you a much more tangible example. Okay. It comes in Quran. وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِئِينَ. وَاسْتَعِينُوا, seek assistance with what? Sabr was-salah, and prayer. Okay, وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ. And this is really difficult. Why? Because when you go into prayer, prayer is the time when you constrict the body. And by constricting the body, you try to feed the soul. Okay, now how do you constrict the body? You say, what are you talking about, constricting the body? This is just salah. Okay, think about salah. Salah starts with what act? Takbir. What is the takbir called? The full name of the takbir? Takbirat tahrima. What does tahrim mean? Harrama yuharrimu, to make haram. Tahrim, made haram. So this is called the making haram takbir. Now you think, what am I? I'm not making haram, brother. I'm in prayer. What happens when you pray? You do Allahu Akbar and you make the world haram to the body. Why? Because when you say Allahu Akbar and you make this haram takbir, you have now made the world haram for the body. Why? The body can't eat. If you eat in salah, your prayer breaks. The body can't talk. If you talk in salah, the prayer breaks. The body can't move. If you turn your chest away from the qibla, your prayer breaks. Right? So what happened is, it's called takbir at-tahrima because you made the world, the everyday things that were halal, you made them haram on you. Now, if you go into salah and you are so fidgety that you have to rush up and down like a chicken pecking at seed, okay, because you just can't take it, the faster you get out of salah, the more comfortable you are, then you know that your body is way too powerful. Do you understand the example? Alright? So if every time you go into salah, you have to get out of salah as fast as possible, because you just can't take it. You're in a rush. You want to get out. You want to do salam because you want to remove that state of hurma on you. You know that your body is an animal that has your soul under its finger. Do you get it? Very simple. So salah is the daily gauge. You know, like it's a litmus test for what's going on with the body. And same thing with Quran. I mean, look, Ajib. And I've made this example 1,000 times. You put on Star Wars, you can watch 3 episodes and be up all night. And the same guy, you tell the same group of people, brother, we're going to shut the TV off and we're going to pray. You pray 2 rak'ah and he's falling asleep in the prayer. Right? Because the body loves to watch Star Wars. It's free, it's chilling, its legs are up, it's watching all these lights and all these things that make no sense. Right? There's no reality to them. This guy's walking around with a piece of light and he's doing this, you know. Think about it, doesn't make any sense, but we all enjoy it, right? So, it's funny, a little green guy giving advice, you know. We're supposed to take advice from our mashayikh, and here we are, you know, listening to this little green guy. And we're very interested and we quote him. Even in the masjid we quote him, Ajib. Anyway, subhanAllah. Funny, we laugh about our own lives when it becomes clear. Sad. So anyway, the point is that if you find that when you put your body in areas of right, you come into itikaf, it can't stand it, right? for the first few moments, for the first few days, a little bit tough. I want to go outside and see what's going on. But eventually what happens is the body gets subdued. Now, when the body gets subdued and the soul begins to grow, then the soul takes over. And when the soul takes over, you would love to stay here. And what happens on the last day? Everyone's crying. Ajib, the same guy who had to fight his soul, to fight his body to come into I'tikaf, is crying like a baby not wanting to go outside at the end of I'tikaf. Crying that Ramadan never end. That would it be that I could fast every day, Ya Allah? And the Ajib thing is that our last day of Ramadan is like the days, it doesn't even compare, is still far beneath the non-Ramadan days of the companions. Just the regular days of the companions. Ajib. So imagine what they were experiencing. Imagine what they were experiencing. So again, what's the simple point? That if you want to test the body and you want to see, is my body too powerful? The best way is just salah. Just pray salah. And if you're comfortable and happy and enjoying the salah, then you know that the body's in check. And if you can't stand the salah and need to get out as quickly as possible, you know that the body's a little too wild. So what do you have to do? Knock it down with a fast. Do a Monday-Thursday combo. Right? They do that right-left combo. You do the Monday-Thursday combo. Knock it down a little bit. You do a 13-14-15 combo. Give it a little hit. Right? You take a little bit of sadaqah and give it away. Give it a little bit of a hit. Alright? You say, okay, I'm not going to eat lunch today. Let's see how you like that. Give it a little hit. But this is the battle. This is the battle. And I'm telling you, the funny thing is, you will succeed in deen and dunya if you follow this advice. Why? Because once you learn to contain the body and you allow the soul to elevate, then the soul actually is the one that will interact with knowledge and flourish. Now you look at our scholars, they did more than any of the so-called scholars of this world. I'm telling you, okay, look, in medicals, like in medicine, if I wrote one chapter in a medical textbook as an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, that would probably be sufficient enough to get a promotion. One chapter. Okay? And nobody writes a whole textbook. You pick up any textbook of medicine, famous textbooks of medicine, Harrison's, every chapter is written by 3 people, not one. Tiny little chapters, then 3, 4, 5 guys write that chapter. And it's considered something noble and honorable. And then you look at our Imma, Hafiz ibn Hajar, for example, rahmatullah alayh, volumes and volumes and volumes on commentary of hadith, and he wrote them all himself. Now you think, the guy writing the chapter in the medicine textbook has what? He's got electricity, he's got microwave instant food, he's got air conditioning, he's got washer and dryer to clean his clothes, he's got a car to go to work, he's got every convenience in the world, doesn't have to think about his clothes, they come pressed, okay? And he can't write more than a chapter, and if he writes a chapter, we praise him. And you look at Hafiz ibn Hajar, no electricity, okay? No conveniences, no refrigeration of food. Has to go and find food every day, etc., etc. And he's writing volumes upon volumes upon volumes, such that we wouldn't even be able to read them if the whole gathering started today and tried for the next 10 years. We wouldn't even get what he was saying. Very few people can understand what he's saying. I mean, we have some scholars in our presence, but besides that, we wouldn't get it. So what's the difference between them and us? The difference is that they had grown their souls and suppressed the body to the level of a mu'min. And by doing so, they became productive in deen and productive in their dunyawi aspects of deen. I wouldn't call that dunya, but they wrote books, etc. And they, interacted with other human beings. And so that's sort of their interaction with other people. So if you want to become a good medical student, for example, it's not hard. Listen, being the top of your class is not hard. It's not. Because you're competing against a bunch of zombies, for the most part. There's some people that are smart and they teach their children not to watch TV and they restrict their child's diet and they make them exercise and they balance them. And then those children, they do very well. But the vast majority of people, they're not disciplined. You can kill competition in college. Most people go to college and they're not disciplined. They're sleeping through class. They don't study. They don't study daily. They cram for their exams. You can waste them. You can waste them. How? Just following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's so easy to waste your competition. And not only that, but you can do 2 things. Sometimes people come and they say, how did you take time off and go study the deen? And you go give these lectures. And you're assistant professor at the University of Chicago. How are you doing all of this? Well, 1, you have a patient family. I mean, that's the most important. But 2, you live on you're living on a different plane. Now, I mean, slowly over time you lose it. But what I gained from, when I came back from Pakistan and then I entered into back into medical school, it was no problem. No problem, because I was on such a, high. I mean, you think about, okay, residents. When people go into residency, ask any resident, they can't even spend time with their wife or their child. And I'll tell you, my first 4 years of residency, I was riding the wave. I was sitting in itikaf, running around the world, giving talks, writing books. I don't even know how I did it. I mean, those days are gone, slowly it dissipates, the effects dissipate. But it all had to do with the simple fact that my body had gotten crushed when I was abroad in Pakistan. And then my sheikh on top of that gave me a couple more hits to my body and gave me a couple prescriptions to grow my soul. So when you proceed down the path of suluk and tasawwuf, which is really just the gist of Islam basically, as Mufti Saab said earlier, in an earlier lecture, this is just really what is ihsan. It's just the gist of Islam. It's getting the pinnacle of Islam. You will be successful in this life and the hereafter. All your issues will be resolved. The whole issue of not doing well in school, the whole issue of trying to carry 2 loads on your back, all of this will be resolved. And you'll be happy people. That's the most important thing. I would love to just see you to be happy people. I mean, your families will be happy, you'll be happy, because you understand what makes a human being. All right, now the last point, actually there's a couple more. Oh, actually there's 4 or 5 more. There's no way we can do all this. So let me just quickly list them then. Gosh, this would be really difficult to do. Okay, so this was the most important one, I should say. Maybe there's 2 most important ones. The second to last point, that if you understand this paradigm, and only if you understand this paradigm, will you have a happy marriage. And this is very important. And it's very important because the vast majority of us are failing in our marriages. I'll tell you that if I have to tell you what are the most common issues that people come to me with, and I get all day and night these things. I get emails and calls and people, and this is just what I do. I can tell you that there's 2 major issues. Number 1, internet and cell phone and the consequences of it. And number 2, difficulties in marriage. These are the 2 big topics that come up. Now, why do we have difficulties in our marriages? Because when we get married, we base the marriage on the body. We say, this brother looks nice standing next to this sister. Okay? These 2 make a nice couple. And this sister looks pretty. And this brother looks handsome. And this brother has a nice house. And this sister wears nice clothes. And this sister has nice jewelry. And et cetera, et cetera. It's always based on the body. So what happens? Now these 2 bodies come together. Right? Now when these 2 bodies come together, actually really what were they? We were describing animals, right? Because they haven't grown the soul. So when these 2 bodies come together, now it's like 2 animals living in a cage. They'll kill each other. They'll tear each other's eyes out. And that's what happens. 60-70% of marriages end up in this same situation. And whether they be Muslim or non-Muslim, it's the same thing. And then they can't stand one another. They're fighting, they're arguing, they're throwing pots across the wall. They would never have thought that they could throw a pot so far. And they're whipping it across the room. And it's funny because people come and tell me these things, and I could not imagine the man throwing a plate at someone. He says, I don't know what happened to me. I threw a plate at her, and she ducked and grabbed it and threw it back at me. Ajib, and she doesn't even know how to throw a football. But she managed to whip this plate across the room. And there's arguments and fighting and bickering, and no one's happy. Why? Because 2 animals are together in a marriage. Now, what is a success to marriage? Is to recognize that actually this is a union of 2 souls. And that when these souls come together, then they come together with the purpose of attaining Jannah. And when the marriage is of 2 souls who have repressed their bodies and are now married based on that nur, that creates such a union that results in coolness of the eyes in this life and permanence in Jannah in the hereafter. So that's why when we select our spouses, we start with what? Deen. Now, not that you don't look at other aspects. You do. That's it's natural. It's human nature. The Sharia does not negate that. But the basis of marriage will always be deen. When 2 individuals strive and struggle to give up everything in the name of Allah, they will have the happiest marriage. Tell me, among the companions, which marriage do people often quote as being the happiest marriage? Which marriage? Exactly. Hazrat Ali radiallahu anh and Hazrat Fatima radiallahu anha. Now you tell me, what was their marriage based on? Was it based on wealth? No. Was it based on the body? No. It was a union of two souls. A union of two souls. These people did not even have food to break their fast with. They did not even have food to break their fast with. And Fatima radiallahu anha and Hazrat Ali radiallahu anh, they maintained sabr and they sacrificed despite their not having food. They were fasting. A faster comes knocking at the door. It says, please feed. Somebody comes knocking at the door. Please feed me. Please feed me. Their iftar. We would never give up our iftar. We would say, I'm fasting, brother. That's mine. Right? They gave up their iftar to the sa'il, to the questioner who was asking for food. And it's from that type of circumstance that you produce children like Hassan and Husain. And you produce a marriage that 1400 years later, people are making dua, oh Allah, unite their hearts the way that you united the heart of Hazrat Ali and Hazrat Fatima radiallahu anha. And you look at the marriage of Hazrat Khadija radiallahu anha and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What was that marriage based on? Marriage was totally based, obviously, on deen. Right? I mean, look at the sacrifices they made. When the Prophet alayhi salam married Hazrat Khadija radiallahu anha, she was the Bill Gates of her time. In Arabia, she was the Bill Gates of her time. And when they got married, when he came to her house, he moved into her house, she took all her wealth on the first day of the marriage and gave it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what did they do then as a couple? They spent their whole marriage, the portion of time that they were married, giving away every aspect of that wealth. Such that when she died, she was penniless. SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. To think about giving away that much wealth, that you start out as Bill Gates and you die penniless. Just living on whatever Allah provides at that moment. And I mean, this is one of the companions who Allah gives His salam to. Comes in hadith, Sahih hadith, that Fatima radiallahu anha, Hazrat Khadija radiallahu anha was bringing a bowl of milk to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the angel came and gave salam to her. Told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Allah is giving His salam. SubhanAllah. I mean, what more happiness could you have? I don't care how big your house is. It doesn't compare. I don't care how big your bank account is. It doesn't compare. I don't care what car you drive. It doesn't compare. That was ecstasy. That was attaining the purpose of creation. So what we have to recognize is that if you want your marriage to succeed, then what you must do is grow your soul and suppress your body. And I'll tell you, otherwise what happens is the body, it becomes an animal and it begins to sin. And sin is the name of the fire that sits, sin is the name of the log that sits in the fireplace of the marriage. What happens? What happens is, okay, the body's out of control. When the body's out of control, it eats out of control. It's an animal. So what happens? You walk down the hallway, you look at every woman with two legs. Now you look at her, you look at her, you look at her, you look at her. Every one of those things is a sin. That's zina of the eyes. Now what happens is these are little twigs. Then you come home and you deposit the twigs underneath your marriage. And what happens? Boom. One little thing goes wrong and it turns into a huge argument. Brother comes to me and says, I don't know what happened. She wanted the dishes put in the dishwasher this way. I put one dish this way, boom. We're fighting all night. I can't even sleep. My wife is yelling at me. Yeah, because that little spark, which is part of life, these little ups and downs occur. That little spark ignited all the twigs underneath your marriage. And the twigs, you brought the twigs. You're the one who was sitting all day on the internet looking at this and wondering what this article is about this girl and why is she breaking up with this guy and all this stuff. And then you bring all those twigs, and this is a whole lengthy discussion, by the way. You bring all those twigs, you put them underneath your marriage, and of course a spark is going to ignite that. Sparks always occur. But the question is, are you sparking, lighter fluid soaked wood? Or are you sparking an empty fireplace? You spark an empty fireplace, you do something, she does something wrong, there's no wood to catch fire, everyone laughs and you move on. Now you do something wrong, there's all this wood to catch fire, boom, it turns into a week-long fight. And once you figure out how to resolve that one, the next fight starts. So we have to be very cognizant of the fact that marriage actually is a union of two souls, and if you want those souls to be happy, both people have to learn to forget about the dunya, not negate the dunya. I'm not saying negate the dunya, but put the dunya in its place. And focus on the hereafter. And when you select your spouses, don't ever make the mistake of selecting based on dunya. Always select on deen. First look at deen, then look at dunya. And you will be very happy. But the vast majority of people don't understand this. That's very sad. People call me for nikah all the time. all the time. And I go perform these nikahs, and I feel very bad because I see that these people were so foolish. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes, $500,000 trying to make everything perfect. They want the girl to look perfect, the guy to look perfect, the hall to look perfect, the music to be perfect, the photographer to be perfect. They want the tablecloth to be perfect. They want the cups to be perfect. They want everything to be perfect. And what they don't realize is that they're marrying two imperfect people. The whole foundation of the marriage was imperfect to begin with, so they wasted all their money. If they would have taken that money and donated it, all of the bodies would have been constricted enough to put barakah into that marriage for many, many years to come. And what happens? $500,000 and divorce 2 months later. It's not common. It's not rare, put it that way. I see it commonly. And it's funny, not only do I see it, the common sense person who's non-Muslim sees it as well. I'm walking down the hallway, one of the radiologists at the University of Chicago, he just stops me and starts talking. And he says, I don't know how he got on the topic, but he says, I don't understand these people, how they can spend $500,000 on, he was talking about someone, I guess, how people do, get these, he was talking about marriages in New York and how he came from this culture in New York where people would spend vast amounts of money on this marriage. And he's like, the average marriage, those marriages last about a week and a half. And he himself is telling me, I'm looking at him, where did he get this wisdom from? It's obvious. It's become obvious to the whole world. So again, that's a very simple principle that I wanted to highlight, and I could do a whole separate discussion on that if one day we should talk about marriage. Then the last thing is that, and maybe even the most important, is that when you have your body, okay, I'm going to do 10 minutes and then we'll close. When you have your body, the sign of the health of the body is that the body is able to perform certain tasks. So for example, if your body's healthy, then you should be able to walk up a flight of stairs, you should be able to run in the park with your child, you should be able to pick up a heavy box, and you shouldn't feel any discomfort. But if you start feeling problems like I can't walk without getting short of breath, or I can't go up the flight of stairs without getting chest pain, that's how you know that there's a problem with the body. In the same way, the way by which you recognize that there's a problem with the soul is when you can't do the things that the soul should do. For example, the soul should be able to enjoy prayer. If you don't enjoy it, there's a problem with the soul, or at least the body's balanced with the soul. The soul should be able to enjoy recitation of the Quran. If you say, I can't touch the Quran, I can look at it, I don't know what's wrong, I can't touch it, there's a problem with the soul, or perhaps I should say a balance between the body and the soul. If you can't stand sitting in the masjid, that drives you crazy, there's a problem with the soul. If you can't stand the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it just disgusts you, na'udhu billah, there's a problem with the soul. Alright? So when you see that there's a problem with the body, then what do? You go to the doctor, you run to the doctor, you say, Doc, I used to be able to walk up a flight of stairs, no problem, I'm walking up a flight of stairs, I get short of breath. So in the same way, when you see and notice problems with your soul, you should approach the doctors of the soul. And the doctors of the soul are the mashayikh of Tasawwuf. I am giving you a lecture, right? This lecture is a medical lecture. It's a spiritual lecture of how to treat the heart. This is what our mashayikh taught us. And I was taught, this is my diagnostic course. This is what we were taught. Okay, this is how you make diagnoses when you deal with human beings. It's a much more intricate lecture, and there's 15 years of experience behind it, and obviously the 40, 50 years of the experience of my shaykh behind it as well. And then whatever he learned from his shaykh, this goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this is really what it's about. So when you see that there's a problem with your soul, you have to seek out the doctors of the soul, because they will be able to help you and advise you and provide you with cure. Now I just gave you I gave you over the counter. This is all over the counter, but there's prescription as well. Put it that way, right? The doctor gives over the counter and prescription. I gave you over the counter. This is what anybody can figure out. This is just obvious stuff. But there's prescription behind this as well. Sometimes you need a little bit of a heavier dose. Yeah, you have a small cold, you go take over the counter. You got a heavy infection, you need antibiotics, you got to get a prescription. So what I'm telling you is this is one aisle of our over-the-counter pharmacy. But sometimes you need prescriptions, and so that's where the mashayikh can help you. You try to diagnose yourself, you're in trouble. No doctor diagnoses their own disease. There is no doctor I know that diagnoses themselves. They always go to a colleague. So in the same way, we should seek out the mashayikh. And if Allah blesses you to ever come in the company of the doctors of the soul, don't waste it. Because they are so few and far between in this day and age. It's such a major blessing to have a doctor of the soul. If you could get access to one, it is such a major blessing that you can't put this in words. It's because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the Sahaba was basically a doctor of the soul. Basically, he was a doctor of their soul. He taught them to disconnect from dunya, and he taught them to connect to akhirah. And he grew them spiritually in such a way that the result was radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. The result was in amanu bimithli ma amantum bihi faqad ihtadaw. I mean, this is the characteristic at which this is the pinnacle of faith that they had achieved. So anyway, I have a lot more points that I actually wanted to make, but I don't have time, and it's gotten way too late. Way too late. So we'll stop there, inshallah. But, so basically the idea was, although this will be the only lecture, inshallah, in this itikaf, I didn't want to, do this academic stuff too much, but I just wanted I wanted to highlight two important principles. Number one is that the science of tasawwuf makes sense. I mean, what have I said to you that makes no sense? What am I saying to you that's a bid'ah? It's a part of the deen. It's a component of the deen, and it needs to be sought after, and it will benefit you. It will make you happy. It will make your families happy. It will allow you to attain success in this life and the hereafter. It's basically the peak of Islam, and we're all seeking the peak of whatever we do. We always want to seek the peak of it. Nobody goes into Harvard seeking to get D minuses. You go to Harvard and you want to get an A. You're not happy until you get an A. It doesn't matter if you're in Harvard. So in the same way, even though we're in i'tikaf, we still want to get an A. We want to max out on this gathering, and we want definitely to carry the results out of the gathering. And maybe I should have made this point as part of this discussion, but it's very hard to reset the balance. Once the body becomes a lion, it's hard to tame it. It's very hard to tame it. But Ramadan is the one time of the year when everything gets reset. Like sometimes the computer gets so screwed up that you just have to format the whole drive, because there's so many viruses and all the programs are running backwards and nothing runs at the proper speed and just things don't work right. So you just say, forget it, reformat everything. You have to start all over again. Ramadan is the reformatting of the body and the soul relationship. And it only comes once a year. And outside of Ramadan, it's very difficult to do this. Very difficult. It requires that you would go and lock yourself in a cave somewhere for days on end. And still you wouldn't achieve in maybe even months what you would achieve in just a few days in i'tikaf. So that's why yesterday, what did I tell you? My whole message to you was that don't waste this opportunity. You have all the rest of the year to check your email, all the rest of the year to chat with your friends, all the rest of the year to go on the internet, all the rest of the year to find out whether the beer is won or lost, or whatever your team might be, wherever you're from. These things always happen. This is all going to keep going on. You're not going to miss anything. But you don't have a chance like this any other time in the year. And I could tell you maybe even in your life. Because today you're sitting in i'tikaf, there's no guarantee you'll be here next year. Next year, who knows? I don't think I'm going to be here next year. Every year I sit down and think, who knows? Just you don't know. You don't know what other things come up. I guarantee you this, in 10 years from now, this gathering won't be here. I highly doubt it'll be here. Things don't last like that. Very rare to see anything proceed more than 10 to 13 years. And we're close to our 10th year now. To me, it just, I don't know. That's my little experience with the world. That very rare do things go beyond they reach a certain point, they develop, and then things spread out from there. So it may be that, 10 of you will go and set up itikafs in your own localities, and I'm not saying, that could happen, just like the Sahaba. The Prophet ﷺ was there. He was there in Mecca for 13 years, there in Medina for 10 years, and then he moved on, and then the Sahaba went and they established an incredible empire. So not that the deen will always be here, but these gatherings, where you can come back and say, oh yeah, I remember itikaf at ICC. And it's funny because I meet people who knew my sheikh, and they say, oh yeah, Hazrat Ghulam Habib, I remember he used to come to our village when I was little. Or even Shaykh Zulfikar. We all can say that. Well, maybe the elders in this gathering, or those that have been regular in this gathering, we can all say that, oh, I remember when Shaykh Zulfikar used to come to New York and we used to sit in his gatherings. Or I remember when he used to come to Chicago and we used to sit in his gatherings. No more. He's not coming anymore. Unless something really strange happens, he has no intention to come anymore. That was a time and a place. There's an i'tikaf that goes on in Zambia every year. I would be shocked if it lasts more than 3 to 4 years from now. It'll reach a certain pinnacle, and Shaykh Zulfikar will move on and perhaps perform i'tikaf in his locality, and things just move on. It's been about 10 years for their i'tikaf as well. It's just the way the world works. Things turn over. 50 years from now, everyone will be different. 100 years from now, no one will even remember our names. That's the way life works. تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. It's the ayah of the Quran. There's an up and a down. So we should take advantage of this, because it's all in our backyard. People are traveling thousands of miles to go to i'tikaf sometimes. And here you got everything ready, set, made. So don't waste it. I don't know what more I can say. You know, and now I gave you a little bit of academics. So you've had some speeches, some talks, and some lectures. Now you had everything. But this should all make sense to you as well, inshallah. So you should keep this framework in the back of your mind because it'll help you understand the importance of what you aim to achieve and the method by which you achieve it. And it'll help to solve your depression in the future should you ever enter into one. And it will help to solve the problems in your marriage should they exist when you get married. And it'll help you to recognize why you sleep 12 hours a day when you only really need to sleep 4 to 5. All right. It'll help you to recognize why you're not doing well in school when you know you definitely have the potential to do much better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's why I say we can charge $1 million for this lecture. Because it's life. It's about how to succeed in life. And as a result, in the hereafter, which is everything that we exist for. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be among those who are able to grow our souls. May He give us the tawfiq to be among those who submit our bodies to the sunnah and the sharia. And may He make us among those who grow their souls into such beautiful gardens that they can be presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and purchased in exchange for Jannah. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.